The New York City winter night was a cruel one, wrapping midtown Manhattan in a shroud of freezing rain. The streets glistened like black mirrors, reflecting the indifferent neon glow of a city that never slept, but often forgot. Inside the hushed elegance of Aurelia, however, the world was a different story. Amber light bathed tables draped in white linen, and the soft clinking of silverware provided a gentle soundtrack for the city's elite. Floor-to-ceiling windows served as a one-way mirror, allowing patrons to gaze upon the storm-lashed world from their cocoon of warmth and privilege. This stark division between the inside and the outside, the seen and the unseen, was a quiet, unspoken truth, a visual metaphor for two realities existing side by side, separated only by a pane of reinforced glass. At a table for one, Eleanor Vance stared at a plate of seared scallops that looked more like a painting than a meal. At 35, she was the CEO of a tech empire, a woman who commanded boardrooms with a quiet, unshakable authority. Her navy blue power suit was tailored to perfection, a single pearl earring her only concession to jewelry. Yet, beneath the polished veneer of success, a profound exhaustion had settled deep within her bones. Her gaze was distant, her eyes holding a hollow ache that no amount of professional achievement could fill. She was the very picture of modern success, a portrait of power and control. Yet she had never felt more isolated, a prisoner in the luxurious, empty penthouse she called home. The world outside the window suddenly came into sharp focus. A small face, smudged with city grime, was pressed against the glass, its breath fogging a small circle on the pane. It was a girl, no older than 8, her clothes thin and torn, offering no real protection against the biting wind and relentless rain. For a moment, her enormous brown eyes met Eleanor's, and in them was a desperate, flickering hope. After a moment of hesitation that seemed to last an eternity, the girl pushed through the restaurant's heavy oak door. She moved like a ghost, a small, shivering spectre slipping past the maître d's disdainful glance, her destination unerringly Eleanor's table. The ambient chatter of the restaurant seemed to fade into a low hum as she approached. The girl stopped beside the table, her small frame a stark and heartbreaking contrast to the opulent surroundings. Her voice, when it came, was a fragile whisper, trembling with cold and fear, yet it carried an innocence that cut through every defense Eleanor had ever built. "Ma'am, excuse me," she said, her eyes fixed on the untouched plate. "Are you going to eat all that? It's just, I haven't eaten in 3 days." The question, so simple and so devastating, shattered the fragile piece of Eleanor's solitary meal. The armor she wore daily cracked, and for the first time in years, a raw, genuine emotion broke through. It's in moments like this, when a simple truth exposes a world of pain, that you realize how much we overlook every day. If you believe these stories need to be told, your subscription helps us give a voice to the forgotten. Ignoring the collective gasp that rippled through the dining room, Eleanor stood and pulled out the ornate chair opposite her. The other patrons, draped in designer clothes and quiet wealth, stared with a mixture of shock and disdain. Their silent judgment was a language Eleanor had spoken fluently her entire life, but tonight she couldn't hear it. A fierce, unfamiliar instinct had taken root in her chest, a primal urge to protect the small, trembling girl who stood before her. She met Maya's wide, fearful eyes, and in a voice thick with emotion she hadn't known she possessed, she said, "Please sit down. Tonight you're having dinner with me." The words felt foreign on her tongue, yet more true than any business directive she had ever issued. For the first time, an action felt completely, terrifyingly her own. She signaled the waiter, a young man who had been watching the scene unfold with professional impassivity that barely masked his astonishment. When he arrived, Eleanor didn't just ask for an extra plate. She took the menu and, without looking at the prices, began ordering. A warm leek and potato soup to start, the roasted chicken with root vegetables, a side of creamy macaroni and cheese, rich and decadent, a slice of chocolate lava cake for dessert with an extra scoop of vanilla bean ice cream. It was not just a meal, it was an offering, a statement. It was a feast meant to banish the memory of hunger, to fill the emptiness that radiated from the child's small frame. Maya watched, her eyes growing wider with each item, a silent tear tracing a clean path through the grime on her cheek. As the plates arrived, filling the small table with an abundance of food, Maya ate with a quiet, desperate intensity that was heartbreaking to witness. She didn't devour the food like an animal. She savored, each bite as if it might be her last, her small hands clutching the silverware with a focused determination. Eleanor didn't touch her own scallops. She simply watched, and with every spoonful of soup Maya tasted, a piece of the icy wall around Eleanor's own heart seemed to melt away. The ambient noise of the restaurant faded into a distant murmur, leaving only the two of them in a small, sacred bubble of shared humanity. In the profound silence between them, a connection was forged, stronger than any contract she had ever signed. Later, as they walked out into the now drizzling New York night, Eleanor instinctively removed her tailored wool coat and wrapped it around Maya's shivering shoulders. The coat, a symbol of her status and power, swallowed the girl whole, but it shielded her from the biting wind. The city lights blurred through the mist, transforming the harsh cityscape into something softer, almost magical. For Eleanor, the short walk to her chauffeured car was a journey. Across worlds. She was no longer just a CEO navigating Midtown. She was a woman leading a child to safety, a simple, profound act that made her entire life of calculated achievements feel strangely insignificant. This single, unscripted decision felt more real than anything she had done in years. The penthouse was a testament to minimalist wealth. White walls, polished concrete floors, and vast windows showcasing a panoramic, godlike view of the city. To Maya, it must have looked like a palace from another planet, cold and intimidating in its perfection. She stood hesitantly by the door, afraid to leave a smudge on the pristine surfaces. Gently, Eleanor led her to a guest bathroom, a cavern of Italian marble, and drew a warm bath. She found an old, soft t-shirt for Maya to wear, its fabric a stark contrast to the stiff, damp rags the girl had shed. As Eleanor tucked her into a guest bed with sheets that felt like clouds, she felt a wave of tenderness so powerful it almost brought her to her knees. This place, for the first time, felt like a home. Eleanor sat by the bedside for a long time, watching the steady rise and fall of Maya's small chest as she finally succumbed to an exhausted, peaceful sleep. The deep lines of worry on the child's face softened, replaced by a serenity that Eleanor envied. In that quiet, sterile room, surrounded by the trappings of her immense success, Eleanor felt a flicker of the same peace, the gnawing emptiness that had been her constant. Companion seemed to recede, pushed back by the simple, profound presence of this sleeping child. She wasn't just offering shelter, she was receiving something far more valuable in return, a reason for the vast, empty spaces in her life to exist. She finally went to her own room, feeling a hope she hadn't realized she had lost. But at dawn, Maya woke to a world that terrified her. The silence of the vast apartment was suffocating, the luxury a stark reminder of everything she was not. Her young. Life had been a harsh lesson in the temporary nature of kindness. She'd been taken in before, only to be cast out when she became inconvenient. The fear of that happening again, of having this warmth and safety snatched away, was a far greater torment than the familiar pangs of hunger. Convinced she was a mistake, a stray that would soon be shooed away, she made a decision born of self-preservation. Before the sun had fully risen, she slipped out of the soft bed, quietly unlocked the heavy door, and vanished back into the anonymity of the city streets. Eleanor awoke to a different kind of silence, not the sterile quiet of her usual mornings, but a hollow, echoing void. She walked to the guest room and found the bed empty, the sheets still holding the faint impression of a small body. A cold, nauseating panic seized her, clamping down on her chest with an icy grip. It was a feeling she recognized with sickening clarity. A ghost from her past, resurrected. It was the same disorienting terror she'd felt at 16 when 2 police officers appeared at her door to tell her that her parents were gone. The old, unhealed wound of abandonment was torn open, and the loss of Maya felt like losing them all over again. Her carefully constructed world shattered in an instant. Her first call was to the police, but her frantic report was met with a weary, bureaucratic tone. A runaway street kid in New York City was not a priority. They took down a description. 8 years old, brown eyes, dirty face. But without a last name or a photo, Maya was just another statistic, a ghost in the system. Eleanor realized with a dawning horror how little she actually knew. She had offered a feast and a bed, but she had failed to ask the most important questions. The very system she had always trusted, the one that protected her assets and enforced her contracts, was utterly useless in finding one lost child. She was alone in this, facing an indifferent city that had already swallowed. Maya whole. Desperate, she reached out to her sister, her voice cracking over the phone as she explained what had happened. She had expected comfort, perhaps even help, but what she received was a cold splash of judgment. You brought a stranger, a street kid, into your penthouse. Eleanor, have you lost your mind? What were you thinking? The words were a slap in the face, reinforcing a narrative she was already battling internally, that her impulse had been reckless, her emotions foolish. The disapproval from her own family was a formidable wall, isolating her at the very moment she needed connection the most. They saw Maya as a threat, a risk, while Eleanor had seen a reflection of her own profound loneliness. Dismissing the warnings and abandoning her meticulously planned schedule, Eleanor took to the streets herself. She traded her power suit for jeans and a parka, her corner office for the cold, unforgiving pavement. For days that bled into weeks, she walked through the city's forgotten corners, visiting shelters, soup kitchens, and makeshift encampments under bridges. She showed Maya's vague description to faces hardened by life on the streets, her voice growing hoarse from asking the same question over and over. She was no longer observing the city's underbelly from behind glass. She was immersed in it, breathing its air of desperation and resilience, and it was fundamentally changing her. The city was no longer a backdrop for her success, but a labyrinth of human suffering she was now determined to navigate. As weeks turned into a month, the trail grew cold, and a bone-deep exhaustion settled in. Hope, once a burning fire, had dwindled to a faint ember. Eleanor was haunted by the memory of Maya's eyes, by the brief, fragile bond that had promised to heal them both. The emptiness in her penthouse was now a roaring abyss, a constant reminder of what she had found and lost. But in her darkest moments of despair, a new resolve hardened within her. The search was no longer just about finding Maya. It was a fight against her own surrender. It's when you feel the world pushing you to give up that you find out who you really are. We tell these stories to honor that fight, and by subscribing, you help us ensure that no one's struggle is ever forgotten. It was a tip from a tired-looking woman at a soup kitchen that finally broke the case. The description of a small, quiet girl who never stayed in one place for long led Eleanor to a makeshift encampment, huddled beneath the roaring belly of the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway. The air was thick with the smell of damp concrete, exhaust fumes, and a palpable sense of human despair. Cardboard and tarps formed a patchwork of fragile shelters against the relentless wind. Eleanor moved through the gloom, her expensive parka feeling like a costume in a world she had only ever witnessed from a distance. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of hope and terror. Then, in the dim light, filtering down from the highway above, she saw her, a small form wrapped in a threadbare blanket, shivering uncontrollably in a corner. She approached with the caution of someone nearing a frightened animal, her boots making soft sounds on the gritty ground. "Maya," she whispered, the name a fragile puff of air in the cold. The blanket stirred, and a small pale face turned towards her. Maya's eyes, usually so large and expressive, were clouded with fever and exhaustion. But as recognition dawned, it was not relief that filled them, but pure, undiluted fear. The girl flinched and tried to press herself further into the concrete wall, her body tensing for a blow or a harsh word. She believed she had done something terribly wrong, that this wealthy woman had tracked her down only to scold her, to punish her for the crime of disappearing. That look of anticipated rejection struck Eleanor with more force than any physical impact, a brutal testament to the world's consistent failure of this child. In an instant, Eleanor was on her knees, the cold and grime of the pavement seeping through her jeans, unnoticed. The carefully maintained composure she wore like armor dissolved completely, and hot tears streamed down her cheeks. "I'm not angry," she choked out, her voice raw with an agony that mirrored the child's. "I was scared. I was so scared." She looked into Maya's wide, confused eyes and let the truth spill out, the confession she had never made to anyone. "When you left. That empty feeling I always have, it came back, so much bigger than before. It's a hole that's been inside me since I was a girl. I didn't know what could fill it until I met you." She wasn't just speaking to Maya. She was speaking to the ghost of her own lonely childhood. She reached out a trembling hand, palm open, an offering rather than a demand. Her gaze never left Maya's. "That night, I thought I was giving you a meal and a safe place to sleep, but I was wrong. You were giving me something. I thought I'd lost forever. You made my big, empty apartment feel like a home." She took a ragged breath, the final, most terrifying truth resting on her lips. "I need you in my life, Maya, not as a guest, not as someone I'm helping. I need you as my daughter. Would you let me be your family? Would you please let me be your mother?" The question, so enormous and life-altering, hung in the space between them, a fragile bridge built of desperation and love, stretching across the vast chasm that had separated their worlds. Maya stared, her feverish mind struggling to process the words. She searched Eleanor's face, looking for the lie, the hidden clause, the inevitable disappointment. But all she saw was a woman laid bare, her own loneliness and hope reflected in her tear-filled eyes. The rigid fear in Maya's small body finally broke, and a gut-wrenching sob tore from her throat. With a cry, she launched herself forward, collapsing into Eleanor's waiting arms. Eleanor wrapped her arms around the frail, shivering girl, holding on as if she were anchoring herself to the world. They clung to each other, two survivors of different storms, their combined tears washing away the cold and the fear. In that desperate, loving embrace under a roaring highway, a silent promise was made, and a family was finally irrevocably born. The legal process was a formality Eleanor navigated with the same ruthless efficiency she applied to a corporate takeover. But this time, her motivation was not profit, but a fierce, protective love. She marshaled the best lawyers in the city, not to conquer a rival, but to build a fortress of safety and legitimacy around a little girl. Within months, the gavel fell in a quiet courtroom, and the adoption was official. Maya Vance was no longer a whisper on the streets, a fleeting shadow in the city's indifferent gaze. She had a name, a home, and a future. For Eleanor, the signed documents were more than a legal victory. They were the closing of a painful chapter in her own life, and the first page of a new one, a story she would now write not alone, but with the small, warm hand of her daughter held firmly in her own. The penthouse, once a sterile gallery of wealth, blossomed into a home. Maya's vibrant, crayon-drawn masterpieces were taped proudly to the refrigerator, a splash of chaotic joy against the cold stainless steel. The stark white walls, once echoing with silence, now absorbed the sounds of laughter during pillow fights and the soft murmur of bedtime stories. Eleanor's life reoriented itself around a new center of gravity. Board meetings were rescheduled for parent-teacher conferences, and late-night work sessions were replaced by helping with homework at the kitchen island. Even her relationship with her sister healed, the initial shock and disapproval melting into a tearful admiration when she saw the profound, radiant happiness that had replaced the weary emptiness in Eleanor's eyes. She had finally found a purpose, greater than any quarterly report. But Eleanor's transformation did not end within the walls of her home. The memory of the desperation she had witnessed on the streets, the faces of the countless other Mayas, was a fire that could not be extinguished. She realized her fortune and influence were not just tools for accumulating more wealth, but instruments for profound change. She established the Maya Foundation, an organization that went beyond mere charity, creating holistic safe havens for homeless children that offered education, therapy, and most importantly, a sense of belonging. Her journey to find one lost child had illuminated the path to saving many. It is a powerful reminder that a single story of compassion can ripple outwards to change the world, and by subscribing, you help us continue to share the testimonies that inspire such life-altering action. 5 years later, on another rainy New York evening, Eleanor sat at a large, noisy table. She was in the dining hall of the newest center opened by her foundation, the room filled with the chaotic, joyful energy of dozens of children. Across from her, Maya, now a radiant and confident 13-year-old, was animatedly telling a story to a younger girl, her laughter echoing the warmth of the room. She caught Eleanor's eye and gave her a smile so full of love and security it took Eleanor's breath away. The hollow ache she had carried for so long was a distant memory, a ghost exorcised by the profound fullness of her new life. She had once sat alone at a table for one, a queen in a cold, empty kingdom. Now, surrounded by the family she had built, she finally understood that true wealth was never about what you owned, but about who you had to love.